Okay, and now that you've come to the final exercise, to the construction of the final report, I have a few tips that I would like to share with you. Now, the first one is this. Look, if you're feeling comfortable, okay, if you're feeling comfortable with the structure that you've been practicing with, and if you're feeling like, okay, I want to try by myself, I strongly advise you not to play the audio and try to reconstruct the reported speech by yourself. And so I strongly advise you to reconstruct the final report. So I strongly advise you to construct the final report by yourself, because you have all the elements that you need. You've already acquired them by doing the other two exercises that came before this one. But because it's your first time doing this and you're feeling insecure, you're feeling uncomfortable, it's totally fine for you to go ahead, play the audio.
Mrs. Carlson was in front of a psychiatric hospital when a nurse
And
came
then
out.
Pause whenever necessary and put the words in the right place. Okay, like this. Mrs. Carlson was in front of a psychiatric hospital when a nurse came out. It's totally fine to do that. However, if you feel that the story is pretty clear to you and you feel confident that you really understood the dynamics of this kind of exercise, I strongly advise you to leave the player alone. Don't play it. Look to the text and try to put the words together. And I would strongly advise you to do that. Look, start here. Mrs. Carlson in front of a psychiatric hospital. Now notice that when we have that, look, subject, like our subject here is Mrs. Carlson. And then here we have a location, the place, the location of that person, okay? Now we have a specific verb for that. So think about this. When I ask you a question like this, where is the capital of Brazil? Where is it? Well, the capital is in the center of the country, right? The capital is in Brazilian. And then you might remember that the verb you're looking for is the verb to be. But of course, there are other possible verbs, okay? For instance, because we have a place and a location, so why not use the verb to stop? Mrs. Carlson stopped in front of a psychiatric hospital. That's also possible. But then I invite you to have a look down here and see if the verb to stop is available. You're going to see that it's not. And the only possible answer is actually the verb to be. The verb to stop would be an alternative, but we don't have that option here. So what is our next best candidate? Well, our next best candidate is the verb to be. So Mrs. Carlson was. And then you should drag that one over there. Okay? But if for whatever reason you were unable to figure that out, what I strongly advise you to do then is this. Just ignore the first one, okay? Skip that one and keep going. So Mrs. Carlson in front of a hospital, a nurse came out. Okay, a nurse came out. And then for this particular gap here, okay, we're going to have a similar situation, because of course you could argue that we could use words like and or then. Look, Mrs. Carlson in front of a psychiatric hospital and the nurse came out. She was Mrs. Carlson in front of a psychiatric hospital, then a nurse came out. Well, these are valid ideas. However, we don't have these options down here. Okay? None of these words are here. So what that means is that these two words here are not viable choices for us. So my suggestion is that, knowing that these are not the two words, now there must be a similar word that fits there. Now in this case, the closest one would be this one here, when. So Mrs. Carlson was in front of a psychiatric hospital when a nurse came out. That seems to fit there. But again, if you don't feel confident that this is the right word, skip it. And then my next advice to you is this. I think you should go back to the first two exercises, okay? Because you remember where the words go, right? Look, I need to talk to someone because I have a darkness I can't control. You know this by heart by now because you've done it at least twice, okay? So my suggestion is that you look for these verbs or the position in the text where these verbs are missing. So look, she, okay, she told the nurse that she blah 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 to talk someone. Okay, and now you know, because you know where the verb to talk is. The verb to talk is here, so the previous verb is the verb to need. She needed to talk, and then that's what you're going to do. That's what you're going to say. So she needed, because Mrs. Carson told the nurse that she needed to talk. She needed to talk to someone, and that she had a darkness she could control. Sorry, a darkness she couldn't control. And by doing that, you reduce the number of options that you have down here. Now, as you reduce the number of options, it makes it easier for you to figure out the other answers. Okay? Another very important thing that I would like to emphasize with you. Many of my students, when they come to a position in the text like this one here, and they feel completely lost, instead of skipping it, instead of abandoning it, they keep guessing, and they keep going like this. Okay, Mrs. Carson, when? Okay, Mrs. Carson, when? Mrs. Carson, when? In front of a psychiatric hospital. And actually, they do this completely randomly, without checking, without asking themselves if a word like that actually fits in a place like that. Well, then if you do this, the exercise loses its purpose completely, because this is not a guessing game. This is supposed to be a moment for you to refresh your knowledge, to put ideas in check. So, Mrs. Carson in front of a psychiatric hospital. Okay, somehow you should figure out that you need a verb. Okay, and then this is a candidate, this is a candidate, this is a candidate, and this is a candidate. Okay, but the thing is, I need a verb in the past. Okay, so come is either the infinitive form or the present simple form of this verb. So the verb to come is not an option here. Okay, I would need the other ones. But then if I try to put these verbs here, right, I'm going to see that some of them just don't fit. They don't make sense. Mrs. Carson invited. When you invite somebody. No, it's not this. Mrs. Carson approach. When you approach something or someone. Okay, so what is my next choice? Well, Mrs. Carson was. She was in front of a psychiatric hospital. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, I'm gonna go with this one. Sometimes my students, they don't do that, either because, I don't know, they are insecure, or maybe they're a little bit lazy. I don't know why they don't do that, but they don't. And it's a big mistake, because when they do that, so if they don't do that, they should skip. But they should never try to guess, just throw a word there and hope that it's all right. No, if you put something there, it's because you've taken the time to take a look at what comes after and what comes before that word. And then you, as a student, you ask yourself if what comes before and if what comes next somehow links together in a proper way with that verb. If you can make the link, then I advise you to try. Then you can take a risk. But if you haven't done that, if you haven't questioned yourself about the meaning of the word that comes before, the meaning or the function of the word, the word or the expression that comes after that, don't do that, because then you're just guessing. And then the subject, and then the exercise lose its purpose completely. Okay? I just wanted to emphasize on this idea with you. Okay, then finally, once you complete the exercise, once you're satisfied with your answers, you come here, you click here, and you check to see if your answers are correct. So, for example, look at this. I see all the answers that I had provided up to this point, they were fine, but I was not brave enough to try with the other ones. Okay, so then what's my next step? Well, I know these 4 answers already, so I'm going to retry. And like I said before, if I'm not confident enough to keep trying, well, I can always use the audio as supporting material. So I can go ahead and play the audio like I'm going to do it right now.
Mrs. Carlson was in front of a psychiatric hospital when a nurse came out. She approached the nurse and told her she needed to talk to someone and that she had a darkness she couldn't control. The nurse invited Mrs. Carlson to come with her and told her she would see if they could help her. Mrs. Carlson was in front of a
Well, and now I'm pretty confident that I know all the answers. And then I put everything together in the right place. So Mrs. Carlson was in front of a psychiatric hospital when a nurse came out. So she approached the nurse and told her she needed to talk to someone. Because when you talk to a person. So she needed to talk to someone. And she also said that she had a darkness she couldn't control. Well, the nurse invited her to come with her inside the hospital and said that she would see if they could help her. And then at this point, you can be certain that everything you've done so far is absolutely right. Okay, but then I have to warn you. This is where most students make the biggest mistake of their lives, which is they get comfortable here. They get, let's say, satisfied. They think, okay, that's enough. I've done my job. And then I would like to tell you that if you've come this far, actually, you've done 50% of your job. Because the next thing you should do is to play this audio here as many times as you need.
Mrs. Carlson was
to master the pronunciation of these words, of these sentences. Not only the pronunciation, but also the intonation. Look, if after repeating this to yourself a few times, you feel confident to deliver this with a quality English, like I'm going to do now. Mrs. Carlson was in front of a psychiatric hospital. You see, I say psychiatric with confidence. I know how to pronounce this word. It's not like once I get it right and then I get it wrong and then I get it right again. No, I've mastered the sound. I know how to pronounce this word. So Mrs. Carlson was in front of a psychiatric hospital when a nurse came out. She approached the nurse and told her she needed to talk to someone and that she had a darkness she couldn't control. You know, only then I would advise you to stop. Not to stop, I would advise you to go to question number 2. I would advise you to do everything until you get to this point when you're going to construct report number 2. Okay? There are 8 reports for you to construct. And I promise you, if you do this systematically with this level of commitment, I guarantee when you come out of this activity here, your command of this structure, of this functionality of the language will be completely different. You will have mastered the power of reported speech. And that's what I advise you to do.